Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to this event. I'm Courtney. I'm a grad student at Jackson, and I'll be moderating our esteemed panel here today. Before I do introductions of all of our speakers, I'll just set out a few housekeeping rules. Just engage respectfully. This session is also going to be recorded. If you want to engage on social media, that's widely encouraged using the hashtags of #reclaimingmemory in accordance with the title of our event. You can place any questions that you have throughout the course of the event in the Q&A box. And then when we go to the Q&A portion after the open discussion, when we move to open discussion, we'll take your questions. And so this event is going to talk about how we think about memory and memorialization, especially in post-conflict contexts. And we have a variety of speakers here with particular emphasis on Africa and talking about memory and reclaiming memory after violence or conflict as kind of part of a transitional justice process. And we're going to look at the ways in which grassroots initiatives like civil society and art and entertainment play important roles in rethinking memory and promoting healing, accountability, and progress in post-violence settings. So I'll introduce the panelists briefly, and then we'll give each panelist a few minutes to talk about their work on the topic and what reclaiming memory and rethinking memory means to them in the course of their own work. So first we have Eddie Mandry, who's the director for Africa and the Middle East initiatives here at Yale. And he'll speak on Yale's projects on memory and documenting history. And then we have Hippolyte Netagwirwa. He's a Rwandan artist, activist, and founder of an organization called Be the Peace, in which he works in Rwanda on memory and memorialization. Hippolyte was also a World Fellow with the Jackson Institute in 2020, and now he's a research fellow at Yale's Shell Center for International Human Rights. Cora Reeves is a World Fellow at the Jackson Institute for 2021. She's worked over the last 14 years on women's rights and initiatives globally. She's an African feminist who contributes to scholarship through the symbolism of checkpoints and uses storytelling to call for visibility on social justice issues and the promotion of healing. She'll speak about her book, Inappropriate Medley, and its relevance as a catharsis for healing. Then we have Udo Illo, who's a World Fellow this year as well at the Jackson Institute. He's worked over the last 20 years on building citizens' participation in demanding democratic accountability. As the Nigerian representative of the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, he's focused on creativity and finding new tools for promoting democracy. Udo's an author, and his latest work is Cassie, which is a 3-part book of poems honoring the memory of his daughter. And last but not least, we have Thomas Thurston, who's the Director of Education and Public Outreach here at the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition. He currently hosts the Center's Slavery and Its Legacies podcast and leads professional development workshops for teachers in Connecticut, the United States, and globally. So welcome to all our panelists. And if we could just start with some opening remarks about the work that you do relative to this question or issue of reclaiming or rethinking memory, and how your work kind of ties into the themes of healing and justice and reconciliation. We can start with the same order I introduced. So Eddie, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you very much, Courtney, and it's a great pleasure to be here with such a distinguished set of panelists, co-panelists, and welcome to all the participants. We appreciate you making time to join us. As mentioned, I'm Eddie Mandry, Director of the Africa Initiative at Yale, and privileged to hold that position as an African, someone who's from the continent with strong connections to the continent, but also someone who's American. And so manifesting those connections between the US and the continent of Africa. But before I begin, I'd like to start by a land acknowledgement statement. And Yale University acknowledges the indigenous people and nations, including the Mohegan, Mashantucket Piquia, Eastern Piquia, Shagitakuk, Golden Hill Pogosset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquian-speaking people who have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these people and the nations and this land. And I think it's important to begin with that acknowledgement, because far too often it's easy to forget that the spaces and places that we occupy physically here on our campus and other parts of our communities carry a very rich history, sometimes very traumatic, but a history that's intrinsic to who we are. And so on the question of memory and history, like many institutions in the United States and beyond, Yale is not immune to the legacies of slavery and the realities and implications of white supremacy. And so these histories that are both manifest in what may have taken place in this country and also on the continent of Africa are important for us to kind of pay attention to as we try to understand who we are and where we are. And to understand where we are today and to move forward as a community, we must study our history. And as an American institution that's over 319 years old, it's imperative for us at Yale to do the same. And so Yale has a very complex past that includes associations with many associations, some of them formative, with individuals who actively promoted slavery, anti-Black racism, white supremacy, and other forms of exploitation. And so it's imperative that we have and we take the responsibility to explore this history, including some of the most difficult aspects of this history. We cannot ignore our institution's own ties to slavery and racism. The unity has made express commitment to research. So I feel like sometimes what is missing is an awareness that there are people in our community who have made an express commitment to research and understand these ties and the complex histories that exist. And so Yale has made some progress and continues to grapple with its ties to slavery. In February 2017, President Salovey announced the renaming of Calhoun College, which would be changed to honor one of Yale's most distinguished and influential graduates, Grace Murray Harper. President Salovey, in his statement at the time, said, "John C. Calhoun's legacy as a white supremacist and a national leader who passionately promoted slavery as a positive good fundamentally conflicts with Yale's mission and values." Obviously, there is yet more to be done. There are many other icons or symbols of this conflicted legacy on our campus. And so there was a working group set up not too long ago to investigate the historical ties to racism and slavery in Yale's history. The working group consists of faculty, some staff, 2 members of the New Haven community, and 3 archivists and 4 research assistants. And according to David Blight, who leads this effort, Professor David Blight, who is affiliated with the institution that Tom Thurston is affiliated with, according to him, the primary reason for this working group is to know from where you came. This knowledge of where you come from is critically important. And so I think there will be a conference coming up soon, October 28th to the 30th. I believe the conference will be part of this Yale slavery research project, and some of the researchers will be providing some of their findings from the work they've been doing. And I think it's part of the 23rd annual conference on Yale and slavery in historical perspective. And so there is going to be some increasing and continued discourse on this question. It's a critically important matter, but it's just an honor to hear from those of you who have knowledge and insight into this question from your own unique perspectives. So thank you very much, Courtney.
Thank you, Eddie. Ibolite, do you want to go next?
Um, Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at this very important day and time and place. I will probably go as talk about the work I did in 2019 as a way of also using my activism, but using my skills and my body and my my all abilities to remember the genocide against the Tutsi that I survived when I was 7. And I will be able, I hope I can be able to share my screen. Can you see my screen? I hope so. So the walk I did was called Be the Peace Walk, and it was a pilgrimage performance of peace and love and hope through the memories of the genocide against the Tutsi. And I did it on a 25th remembrance of the genocide against the Tutsi. And I would be able to, I would speak as a poem as a way of kind of avoiding the delay and the way and where it comes from and why it was. But the background is I thought it was the only way I could check and I could use my body and my mind and my knowledge to go around across the country for 100 days, working every day for the day that the genocide took place. So I walked miles and miles when I was 7 years old. I walked to find refuge. I walked to escape the killers. I walked to a refugee camp. I walked hunger and disease. My dad walked, but was killed. My only best friend of childhood walked, but did not survive. I walked as a child slave. Women walked. They were killed and raped. Relatives walked and were killed. Genocide against the Tutsi. I survived. I walked memories few months after the genocide. I walked to start my primary school. Walking to school or to fetch water was like walking in memories. Bushes would remind me of the killed bodies of relatives, neighbors, or friends. Or I could be remembering where we hid. I could be scared by seeing anyone. I sometimes could be walking to a destination and find myself running as I was escaping. I ran from men, women, and neighbors because I was scared of people. I had seen a complete horrible part of what humans can do. I walked and never spoke because all I wanted was to tell these stories as the only justice I could do. 26 years was in 2019. And then I walk peace. I speak forgiveness. I run justice. I share joy and kindness because I have also seen that people can learn to love. In 2019, it was 25 years since the end of the genocide against the Tutsi. I walked Be the Peace Walk, a 100-day performance piece. I walked across the country in commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi. I was given food and shelter. I was joined and supported by people from all over the world. Some of you probably are here today I covered each Rwanda's 30 districts of over 100 days, one for each of the days that the massacre took place. I planted trees, visited care homes for the disabled and elderly, and ran food and clothing drives. I met survivors, I met survivors and perpetrators. I walked and played football with children of Rwanda. On the slide, you can see the blue. The blue is the line of represents the journey, the itinerary that I did in 2019. I met survivors. Some will never know where their beloved ones were thrown after being killed. And on the photos, you can see they're all survivors. And I attended some of the commemorations event, and some mass graves are still being discovered around the country, and some families were completely killed. As you can see, a plaque on the photo that talks about a family that was completely killed and no one was left in the family. And on the photo, you can see some of the people I met were left just by themselves, and they have no one left in their families. Well, I walked, and one of the people who risked their lives to save Tutsi, to rescue Tutsis, is on the slide. One who's very important woman who was a nun, but she had 40 people, more than 40 people, and she didn't want to hand them to the killers. She said, before you kill them, you have to kill me. And that represents the heroism of the people. And one man on the photo as well, he rescued Tutsi and 6 Tutsis, risking his own life and families. And these are the heroes that the memories should remind us to go back to their values of in conflict, and we should learn from these people. I've met survivors who have forgiven the killers of their families. On the top right, you will see the man who has forgiven the husband of the woman they are standing together with in the photo. And the man killed the family of that man. The priest in the middle of the photo, you see in the photo in the middle, has built a village for people who have killed his families. On the left side, you will see I'm standing in the middle of the two people. I'm standing between 2 people. One is a young man who survived, and the other man is the one who killed his family. And now they work together through the Be the Peace organization that I created. Well, as you can see, people are working together and building peace together. If you look at the photos, you just see people. You won't see the killer, you won't see the survivors, but they're all people and they're working together after the tragedy. And that's what we should be doing if we talk about memories and remembrance. It should be about building the future. Well, I walk and realize that the hatred is intergenerational transmitted. And when I walked, I've made a very important choice of my life already. I chose to forgive. I walk the peace today, walk the hope, the love through suffering and memories of life. I walk my belief that peace is what you give and not what you ask others to give you. I hope we all be the peace every day, peace with everyone, and peace everywhere. Thank you so much, and I welcome any question later.
Thank you, Ipola. And again, for the participants, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A as they come to you, and we can get to them after we finish the other panelists speaking. Corda, would you like to go next?
Yes, I can go now, or maybe Udo, do you want to go since you don't have a PowerPoint?
that is fine. I can go on. Thanks, Hippolyte, for that very moving testimonial about the exciting work you're doing. I'm from Nigeria, from the southeast of Nigeria, a place between 1967 and 1970 was known as the Republic of Biafra. Sometime in December or thereabouts of 1968, my mother went to the market. During the war, people become quite entrepreneurial. And this was during the Civil War in Nigeria, a war that was fought in the theater of the southeast of the country where I come from, when they seceded from Nigeria after the pogrom in the northern parts of the country in 1966. And so my mom went to the markets. My late sister, then she was about 5 or 6 months, and mom went to the market. She was doing a bit of buying and selling to make ends meet. There was a lot of starvation in the land. And while she was in the market, they sighted an aircraft of the federal troops. Routinely, these aircraft come to bomb markets, churches, and schools, which of course is against international law. On this very day, they sighted the aircraft very, very late, and mom didn't think she would be able to take cover in the bush or anything. And so she laid down my sister on the ground and used her own frame, her body, to wrap around her. At that point, she said that she thought she was going to die, but she also prayed that her body can absorb whatever explosion or whatever projectiles that are going to come from the plane. And so she was willing to sacrifice her life at that moment to make sure that my sister lived. Minutes after the strafing of the market by the military, by the federal planes, my mom got up. Miraculously, she was not harmed in any way. My sister was also saved. But for a lot of people in the market that day, they didn't get up. And this was the story of the Civil War that claimed at least 2 million lives in Nigeria between 1967 and 1970. Of these 2 million people that died during the Civil War, it is estimated that at least 1 million kids died out of malnutrition, because the government, the federal government of Nigeria at that time, decided to apply a war strategy of blockade, making it impossible for aid assistance to come into the Biafran territory. And that led to massive malnutrition that saw to the death of, these little kids. Fortunately, my siblings survived. A lot of that survival came from the kindness of people who did not even know before the war where Biafra was on the map. All over the world, people donated food, donated money. It will also interest you to know that the Doctors Without Borders started in Biafra because they were there. And after the work they did in Biafra, they decided to, keep up with that organization. A lot of people flew aircraft at night, dodging from the federal bullet and projectiles to come into this place to make sure that people were fed. And some of them paid the ultimate price. They were not Biafrans, they were not Nigerians, they were not even Africans. They were just people who cared. And more than 50 years after the Civil War, my country has also refused to have an honest conversation about what happened, what we did to each other, the horror that we inflicted on each other. We've become very scared of our history and become very scared of opening up the wounds. But surprisingly, these things don't go away, because the shadow the horror and the pain and the pent-up anger of the Civil War has come back to haunt my country. As I speak to you now, there is active, violent agitation in the southeast of Nigeria, in what was previously Biafra, by young men and women who are saying that they don't see a future in Nigeria, who feel that the past grievances and the horror that their parents went through in the hands of the federal troops were never addressed, and who have decided that they will also give their lives in fighting to make sure that they're able to reclaim whatever was left of the memory or the glory of Biafra. In that same country, in the southwest part of the country, people have also come out to say that they want to secede. They don't want to be part of Nigeria anymore. Of course, in the Niger Delta, the south-south part of the country, has been more than a decade of military, of violent resistance to what is seen as an inequitable and harsh federal system that have taken resources from one part of the country and put them in another part of the country, without the benefits coming to those who live in the places where the environment has been destroyed. And so, because we've refused to resolve our history, because we've refused to confront our memory, we are now imperiled by the aftershock of the Civil War and the bitterness that it has created, which were never redressed. Chimamanda Adichie is a celebrated Nigerian author, and she did a beautiful story, Half of a Yellow Song, which borrowed a lot from people's experiences, but somehow tells the story of the Civil War, what it did to families, what it did to people, and of course, the untold harm that it had inflicted on the psyche of Nigerians. It will interest you to know that the Nigeria Censor Board for movies refused to have that movie screened in the country. They only accepted the screening of the movie after some level of censorship. And so, as a people, as a collective, we've repressed our memory, and it's destroying us from the inside, because it's like a cancer. When you don't open up memory, when you don't confront memory, when you don't confront history, it eats you up from inside, and it begins to destroy whatever facet you may have built up on the basis that you've moved on. You've not actually moved on. And so we are finding expression of this memory in very negative ways in Nigeria, because we've not opened up the constructive ways to ventilate the memory, to remember, to celebrate, and to forgive. Some of the things that has happened is that 50 years after the Civil War, for the first time, we convened a national conference that was titled 50 Years After Biafra. And for the first time in Nigerian history, a top government official attended an event that had Biafra in the headline. And that was the then acting president and the current vice president of Nigeria, Yemi Osinbajo. And in that event, he spoke about the power of memory and the power of history. He spoke about the need for us to be open to having conversations about where we're coming from. But he also said something that was uniquely important about the kindness and love that even in this misery and horror that people show to each other. And that tells us that there's something there for us to hold on to. It wasn't all bad. In the midst of all that calamity and destruction, human kindness, both externally by people that loved Nigeria or people that just loved human beings, but even internally by the warring parties, we still found some common humanity for us to do some great things together. And that is, for me, what needs to be celebrated. That is, for me, the starting point for us as a country to look back at what happened. The Center for Memories in Enugu State, southeast of Nigeria, of which I'm a member of the board, is one of the organizations now that are focused on telling the story of the war, allowing people to come and tell their stories, curating pictures, curating incidents, curating artifacts, the technological progress that the war created, which we never really latched on, the unity that it created among some people, and the lessons of that past that has become relevant for us to move forward as a country. I remember in 2018, I went to the Center of Memory, and there was a memory board, and we were asked to tell a story about somebody we know that died during the war. And I remembered my uncle, Isaiah, who went missing when the federal troops came to my village. and they looked for him for more than 7 years and they never found him. On the day I was born, that was the day my father was informed that indeed they found him, that he was dead. So my entry into the world for the family was also a reminder of the big loss that we have. But it creates an irony that I find very positive. That even in the midst of death, life begins and life happens. And for us as a people, for us as Nigerians, we need to find life in this tragedy and begin to build up again, looking back with courage and looking forward with forgiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Udo. Corda, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I'm trying to put it on slide. And I am technologically, yeah, I think I got it.
We can see it, but if you go down to the bottom right-hand corner, there's the Zoom
Yeah.
bar.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you, Courtney. And thank you, Udo, Hippolyte, and Eddie. And also thanks to you, Tom, for being a part of this. I want to start by acknowledging the spirit and the lives of all those that we lost during the crisis in Liberia. Can you see the slide? Is it fine? Can you see the slide, everyone?
There you go. That's better.
Okay, yes. Okay, so I'll leave it and speak. So I want to start by saying that the transitional justice process started in Liberia in January of 2008. If you talk to Liberians, some people will tell you that the war started 30 years ago. And so some people will say it started before that time. And that is a challenge in terms of harnessing our collective memory for peace and for justice. In Liberia, an estimated 250,000 people got killed at checkpoints and in other spaces. And there was massive displacement in the sub-region. In Ghana, in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberians were scattered in all of these places without the firm grounding of home, of familiarity. I spoke of the TRC process because with the significant impact of the war on Liberians, including Liberian women who were sex slaves and women who bore children for people that they did not know. I don't know anyone who participated in the TRC process. Like I don't have a friend or relative who said, today I am going to share my story. You know, at the TRC, wherever, you know, they were and going through that process. I also know that after the war, and we had many phases of the war, but after the war, the residual impact on the Liberian people has been devastating. devastating both in terms of the youth bulge, where we have about more than 50% of our population below the age of 25. And within that population, we have a crisis of drug addiction, the lack of unemployable skills, trauma as a result of generational trauma, as a result of the war, how it affected their parents and how, it's taking a toll on their lives now. And I think the most sad part of that situation is the lack of hope to see the future, to see the direction, to even be a part, to have some representation in that direction. And that is why, it was really important, what Hippolyte said about, standing in a group where perpetrators and survivors, came together to bring peace and to, live together. It's important. But I want to talk about, memory, that with all of those issues affecting men, women, young people in Liberia, I think the collective burden of memory, especially memory associated with atrocities during the war, is something that haunts us every day. And in a way, I think it influences that stagnation, that we cannot move forward as a people because we're still battling what we hold, within our minds. And I'll tell you a story about myself. I remember sitting in a room on many Sundays so that must have been after 1992. I remember sitting in a room. Sundays were important to me, to my family, because that was when we convened around food, around, what had happened to you during the week. This was when we connected. And no one would give an excuse, to say, I cannot be there, or I am busy, or I'm in school. We had nothing to do but to be there for each other. And after the war, Sundays were always, a difficult time. And I would sit most times by 11 o'clock, it's almost lunchtime. There was no one around, in terms of my family. And I would sit and lean my head on a table. I was crying. I would usually, be crying. And in a very sort of detached frame, I noticed a consistency that I would cry and my tears would almost form like a puddle, if you can imagine that, a puddle on the table. And that puddle would, rise to the level where it would go slowly on the table and fall on the floor. And I was surprised, like I haven't seen tears like this. I didn't even know that people could cry to the point that their tears would gather and fall on the floor. And I passed that stage and went into what is the normal world, doing everything that I needed to do. And then I had the opportunity to travel to the US, actually to Vermont, to do grad school. And at that point, I realized that my reaction to daily life, lacked particular, social skills that were expected. So I did not trust people. I got scared for, many things that people would just say, oh no, it's just the, sound on the car tire. It's just, a sound someone is closing the door. So that was, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I had the opportunity to seek help. And while I was doing that, or before I started to do that, I wrote. And I saw writing as a catharsis. In the beginning for me, it was telling my story to myself because I could not tell it to people at the time. So I would write, anywhere, just scribble on paper, on my phone, I would write. And I wrote until I had a Word document that was about 57 pages. I managed to seek help. I think, I am well. I'm not sure what is 100%, but I feel better than I felt, at that time. So when COVID started, I thought, since I have this document, 57 pages, I will go ahead and do something about it. And I published, to make a long story short, I published the book. It's called Inappropriate Medley. And Inappropriate Medley, I was very honest about it. And my description of Inappropriate Medley was something that many people embraced, especially the women of Liberia, my friends within the feminist movement, the women's rights activists in Liberia and around the world. They were happy that I was able to put my thoughts down. First, happy for me as a personal initiative, but also it resonated with many people who had gone through the war. The people in Liberia felt like this is the first time, that we are seeing this collection that represents something that we've been holding for a long time. So Inappropriate Medley, like I say, it emerged from a place of pain, loss, and survival. And for me, it is a feminist political project. So the first is the book. And then I thought that maybe I could use this book as a conversation piece so that we start to talk about what peace looks like once we can talk about what happened that led us to this place of pain. And this is what I have been doing. But then I also had this, I have this amazing opportunity like Udo and Hippolyte. I am a World Fellow at Yale. And I've learned so much, about what Yale was doing. When I talked to, I had a meeting with Eddie and I also talked to Thomas. It was mind-blowing, the alignment, the things that I was thinking about, what I wanted to learn, that there were so many people at Yale and people who have left, including Hippolyte, who were doing work, who were investing their time in this kind of work. So I decided that I will take this time to learn to understand the intellectual, aspects of this, the different theories, what other people are doing. I followed closely a Liberian PhD researcher, Aaron Weir, who has been talking about the concept of memory and how memorialization is important, but it has to start from a place of dialogue where communities, even if the memory is invisible, say for example, there is a place, if you go to Liberia, my memory of driving through, on a highway through Liberia is the checkpoints, this is what I remember. It's the checkpoints, what happened at those checkpoints, what I saw. I remember, there was a man who they claimed that he was a crime man, one of the tribes that they hunted during the war. And people were actually, literally chasing this man with a knife. And I heard people yell and say, he's a teacher. Oh, this is somebody's father, oh no, he is not this particular tribe. And they chased him and they killed him. So that shock and that reality today has pushed me to do what I am doing or what I would like to learn and to know from other people working on this across the world. And also to be able to go back to Liberia and start a conversation and start the documentation, because I acknowledge my privilege that I could be in a space where I was able to seek help, where I was able to write a book and publish a book. But I know that there are many other people in Liberia who are still holding all of this information to their souls, and they are still hurting. And it is affecting the development process in Liberia, the building of trust and relationship development. But most importantly, it is hurting the journey to peace and to justice. So I believe that this is the time for us to, work and start to listen and learn to what is happening to people after the war in Liberia. So I've put a picture on the screen, and I'm sure you have been able to, some people have seen it. It's one of the memorials in Liberia. It's from the Phoebe Hospital and School of Nursing, Central Liberia, Bon County, and there was a massacre that occurred at the Phoebe Hospital. At that Phoebe Hospital, my family experienced, at the massacre, my family experienced a personal loss. And one of the most fulfilling things that happened to me this year was to be able to reunite or to bring back this gift of a book and place it on the memorial. For me, it was a political stance that the merging of memory and memorialization is important, it's non-negotiable. So for me, this is what this picture represents, that we must do it to be able to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Corto. And to turn to you quick, Thomas, I still want to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A, but if you want to kind of tie these, we've heard several stories of personal witnessing of violence and trauma and how art and memorialization has taken place. How is this discussion we've had today sort of align with your visioning in terms of education and the study of memory?
Well, thanks for so much to all of you for allowing me to participate. And yeah, I think that, I could begin to talk about this by going back to what Udo said about the problem that Nigerian people have in addressing the troubled history of their country. I think this is something that Americans share, and I imagine that people in Rwanda and Liberia do as well. And I in particular have been working for the last 4 or 5 years with bringing together teachers from Connecticut and teachers from Johannesburg and Soweto to talk about our shared histories, but also with teachers in Sierra Leone. And I wanted to kind of, just as a way of bringing up some ideas, talk a little about that. Here in New Haven, I think you've all been in New Haven long enough to know that the thing that we share with Sierra Leone, above all things, is the story of the Amistad, the tale of people from the Mandry part of Sierra Leone who were seized, captured, taken into slavery, brought to Cuba, sold, and then in the course of what was to be a short trip to the plantation they were in, they rebel and they take over the ship. And after a long series of trying to get back to Africa, they find themselves in Long Island and then towed here to Connecticut, where they began a struggle to achieve their freedom. I don't go into those stories because I don't have that much. But what I'm interested about is the memory of that tale, both in Sierra Leone and in the United States, and what it has to say about what we make of our history, how we kind of use history. In Sierra Leone, they did return to Sierra Leone and they were greeted by friends and relatives. Their arrival was known about. This was in 1841, 1842. Many of them connected with their family. They were involved in an American mission in Mendeland. In one case, Margot, who's a little girl at the time, went back to the United States and studied at Oberlin College and wrote about a lot of her experience, then returned and was head of a missionary school. But aside from the memory of this story that gets passed on from family to family, through the family, there's not much that is there of that story, because it's a colony of Great Britain, and they certainly don't want to be promoting a story about Africans rising up and overthrowing their colonial oppressors. It's not until the wars in Sierra Leone in the late 80s and 90s that the story the Amistad kind of takes a new resonance. And the story of this is used as kind of to create a national figure that can unify the country of Sierra Leone. And so Sengbe Pei, who is the leader of the rebellion, he takes on a real important status. He's the subject of plays, many plays, and songs and murals throughout the country. A lot of the younger people, they're growing up and trying to come to grips with the violence, and that they identify him as a brave leader who kind of who overthrow a corrupt government and also bring peace to the country. He's seen, and I asked a teacher that I work with just a while ago, what do you think of him? He's seen as someone, you know, who speaks for all Sierra Leone people, and every child knows he's on the picture of the 5,000 Leone note. You know, they do plays still about him. He's part of the West African Social Studies certificate exam that people have to take. Here in the United States, a similar kind of thing happened. Is the memory of that kind of is held in the African American community, particularly the Black church, who, you know, this kind of emancipatory Christianity, hold on to this story. The Black church was instrumental in arranging for the freedom of the Amistad captives, and to this day, among congregations here and Black congregations in New Haven, March, the second Sunday in March is Amistad Day. It's remembered there. It's also remembered among revolutionary Black fighters as being a case of struggle. So even to this day, we have a statue of Sengbe Pei and the Amistad captives in front of our city hall in New Haven. That is, I believe, the first statue representing an African in the United States. It was made in 1992, so a long time before that happened. But I think it's been very interesting in talking about our shared histories, a history of slavery, of Jim Crow, of the struggle of African Americans in particular for freedom, and a similar kind of struggle on the part of people of West Africa against the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and so many of the wars that kind of grew out of that. That there's a way that that teachers can kind of talk about these historical memories and try to kind of heal historical trauma and come together. So our teachers from Connecticut went out to Sierra Leone to study with our colleagues there. And then the summer of 2019, we brought all 10 of our Sierra Leone teachers to New Haven to study the history of the African American struggle for freedom. And I think finding those common parts has been really useful in opening up a conversation among teachers in their classrooms to begin to talk about these and try to come to some kind of resolution.
Thank you, Thomas. I know our time's running short, but there are a couple questions in the Q&A that I want to try and briefly address. The first is that, you know, you've all talked about how you've used art and performance and civil society initiatives to promote healing and reconciliation. And what is the role of getting the government involved in this conversation on memorialization, and how does that play a role in accountability, or how does art kind of force reckonings in a way that the government can't? And then we'll get to the second question after.
I think that's a question for Udo or Hippolyte. It's not one for me.
Okay. Truth is, we've not been successful. Just to tell you how scared my country is about confronting the Civil War, they excised history from the classroom. So for close to 20 years, history was not taught in any of the schools. So it's been difficult. However, I think that some of these private initiatives, both through arts, civil society groups, are helping to build up the pressure that we cannot run away from this for too long. And of course, the insurgencies and insecurity this has triggered is making it almost impossible for government to not talk about this. It would have been good if they took that initiative without being forced, but now that conversation has become existential. And our effort now is to make sure that we have a credible framework within which that conversation can take place. But government understands clearly that it is either you have that conversation or the country implodes.
For me, I would say there are lots of government initiatives for promoting the memory and remembrance of the genocide and history. There are things that need to be more done. On the work I did and I talked about today, after finishing it, I found out that many genocide memorials that are not open for everyday visit were in place, but they weren't necessarily accessible in many as I would probably have thought. And I made that recommendation so that if you are passing by and you want to go into it, you don't need necessarily to go in on a district level and apply and get responded. But I thought it would be more accessible. And I won't go in many details, but with the research I did also, so apart from the research, but I see the art as being accessible and as being talking to everyone involved, because the art can only speak to everyone. I wouldn't exactly say how many access these arts we do, but I for sure know that after finishing my work, I did recommendations to the government institutions in charge. So again, it's a continuous process, but actually, even when the government is willing to keep that memory alive, but actually the problem I see is those who do not want the government to remember. And that's what actually I'm afraid of. So the art should be even tapping into more of that. Yeah.
And then the other question, and this is a good ending question to kind of tie things up, just very briefly for all of you, what's the hardest part personally in confronting these memories in terms of justice and reconciliation?
Yeah, so for me, Liberia has one of the lowest populations in Africa. So it's a country of 4.4 million people, which literally means if you come from my generation, we had, I think, 3 institutions of higher learning when I went to college. So we know each other, we all know each other. And I know that, I had an experience, sometime after the war, I was on the streets and I saw a friend of mine who we had gone to college together, and we embraced. It was good to see each other. And I went home and explained to my brothers, and they said that this person was on the site of the massacre. In fact, he was with the soldiers who did the massacre, when we lost a family member. So I think the challenge is getting information that the relative safety and, relationships that you have could be related to the war in ways that would make you afraid or make you to further retreat from, the peace building process. And I think that is what worries me, but I believe that it's important for everyone to be able to share the memory and use that towards justice and peace.
I can go. I think for me personally is to see the same ideology that led Rwanda to where it went in the genocide against the Tutsi appears again in different ways in books, in scholarships, in different ways where some people are still kind of pushing for the transmission of this hate that led Rwanda to where it was in 1994. That's the worry I have. That's what affects me the most.
Yeah, for me, it's also the frustration that there's no justice. So all of these things happened, all these kids died, all these people were killed, and nothing happens, and we just move on. And the inability of my country to interrogate that history and seeing a full cycle of the same thing happening again, the hate and everything, it just pains me so much. But one other thing that pains me also is that my parents lost their album during the war. And till today, I feel like I lost an integral part of my history in that war.
I mean, I would just say, just after hearing such powerful stories and testimonials from everyone, that just what troubles me, I think, is the inclination that some communities, people, individuals, leaders have in perpetrating or orchestrating a process of revisionist history. So revising the history in order to placate certain political or other interests, but at the same time disenfranchising future generations of the right to know precisely what happened and the right to be able to constitute their own memory based on fact and what actually happened. So I really appreciate all the great work you're doing, each and every one of you, in order to safeguard the sanctity of that history and memory.
Great. I want to be respectful of the time. I want to thank the Council on African Studies and Jackson for helping put on and advertise this event. I want to thank everybody, all the participants for coming and hearing what I hope is the start of a bigger discussion of these issues based on the personal witnessing that our panelists have attested to today. And most of all, I want to thank the panelists for their very frank discussion of a difficult topic and for taking so many questions from everyone attending. With that said, thank you so much. And if there are any follow-up items or questions, do feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you, Courtney, for organizing all of this from beginning to end. Thank you.
It's nice meeting all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.